Okay, well, our group, apart from Paul, we were lucky enough to have Paul at our table. Um, our group had very little direct experience creating digital resources in the way that we were talking about today. So we were thinking of it more from the end user's perspective. And we did, it actually sounds quite negative, a lot of the stuff that we've got up, because we were thinking more about the challenges. But there was lots of individual experience about some of the things, and a lot of the issues that we've discussed you've already kind of covered. So, you know, again, we were mainly as users, but it does depend on the definition of digital cultural resources. I mean, what do we mean by that term, and where does that sort of definition start and stop? Because a sort of digital cultural resource could be accessed in a library database, or it could be some really, really interactive website. It could be, I mean, I suppose it's down to how you actually define what that criteria is. We did have quite a long discussion about the issues of funding and funding for sustainability. And again, this is something that we've kind of talked about quite a lot over the course of the day. I don't know about you, but very often when you're applying for funding, you're applying for the project that you're delivering, and there isn't any funding beyond the life of the actual project itself. Also, funders don't like projects that have already started, so how do you then get funding beyond that to do more evaluation or to build on that original resource? There are lots of tricks of terminology that you can use to do that, like use the first one as formative evaluation, but I think that there is an issue there. And I suppose in terms of the funding bodies, I think that they should recognise that actually, you know, reusing research and turning it into something else or developing it isn't actually a bad thing. We can't always just have new innovation every time, because how often can you reinvent the wheel? There was something you were talking about, Brianna, in relation to your area. We'll come back to it. Can you remember? It's to do with funding and sustainability. I'll come back to me. We were looking at how to assess impact and the long-term resourcing of it, or the development of that, and again I suppose that's linked into the actual funding itself. Funding would also link into the policymakers as well, because obviously that's influencing how the funding's been distributed. How to retain or attain authenticity in the resources that you're developing as well. We had quite a long discussion about that. Consideration of the end user and the appeal of the general usage of what it is that's being created or what's being used as a cultural resource. Again, we were focusing on that because that's obviously where our experience lay. I think if you're creating resources, you have to think about what's the point of it. There's no point in creating an amazing resource that nobody sees. I mean, there was a slide earlier on about reports, 50-page reports that just end up in drawers. Well, you think about the amount of information that's on the World Web. You can create the most amazing thing, but if nobody can find it, if nobody actually sees it, what is the point? It doesn't matter how great it is. So how do you get it to the right people? How do you get it out there? Which I suppose is a kind of marketing thing. Or if it's to do with how you're using search engines, then obviously it's the language that's used in that as well to try and get people to retrieve data. That works on, obviously, resources as well. So again, we had this idea about language and the vocabulary mismatch. And we also said not everything is digital. I can't remember how we got onto that, but we decided to kind of think quite positively about the advantages, because obviously there's loads of them, which is why we do it. Accessibility, and again, the physical and intellectual accessibility of things as well. We kind of often forget about the fact that there are people out there who are not all exactly the same as us. There's different cultural kind of users. There's different people with different accessibility in terms of their physical abilities. So are we considering that when we're actually creating resources? Are we thinking about how practical it is for people that actually maybe can't see as well as we can, or can't understand language the way we can, or actually the sort of the cultural significance of what we're putting up there is completely different. So how are we balancing that? But I think that the web can do that. That, you know, what's available online can completely open up what we have on offer. Doing something that's reproducible, it provides immediate evidence, but that also obviously doesn't necessarily imply that it provides impact. So again, thinking about how we actually measure that. We didn't really go into specifics about that. I think that's still quite a hard one. Sharing experiences, good ways of sharing best practice. That's again something that obviously has been discussed ad nauseum at the other tables. This idea about, you know, when there's research being done or something's been developed, how do you actually learn from what other people have done? You know, are we all keeping it like this? So it's about how we actually open access in a way that actually everyone can benefit. Okay, then we moved on to question 2. We were trying to kind of be quite specific about what we logged down to make it easier for Marie after this. But I think that when we were talking, there was a lot of overlap between the questions. Obviously, a funding gap, that's a big issue. The ref drives policy, and that can be dangerous. That can be really prescriptive and restrictive and reduce kind of creativity and innovation and development. So again, that's something that I think we have to be aware of. Another thing that we talked about was the idea about a business application of something versus the kind of cultural application of something. They don't always marry up in the same way, but they can still benefit one another if they're cleverly thought through. So data reuse, we talked about that. The danger of everything having to be new. This idea about reinventing the wheel. Why not kind of think about what's been developed and how it can be repurposed or built upon? Infrastructure for sharing. Is this all a marketing problem? Where is the Evaluating Cultural Digital Heritage book for dummies? Which I think there's a great market out there if anybody's interested in developing that little resource. And we finished on actually a question more than any solution, which is what is the value of digital cultural heritage and how do we measure it? So next workshop.